Hi, welcome to part 2 of making a batch rename widget using blueprints and editor utility widgets, also known as UMG or Blutilities. In the previous video, we set up the basic bones of our UI, but none of it is functional yet, where we have the parameters that we use on the left, and we have the list of edited assets or assets to be renamed on the right. But we need to start making this thing work. So let's just get started back in the graph for our batch rename object. So here what we actually want to do is we want to run kind of from these buttons. And so we actually need to go back again because you can only rename these buttons inside of this view where it says next to is variable. So I'm going to rename this one. I'm going to rename this like, button, and it will be preview actors. This one's going to become button preview assets. And this one here will be button confirm rename. And then on the preview actors, we want to have that run when we click on it. So let's just start with that one. We'll do onClicked, which gives us a onClicked callback for whenever that button's clicked. And here we're going to take that dynamic entry box, and the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to reset it, because what we're going to be doing in this onClicked is we're going to create a bunch of elements for all the selected actors that are in the scene, and so we want to make sure that we've cleared that out so we don't just keep adding to that list endlessly. Then we're going to do the get selected actors. But we won't get selected level actors. To find get selected level actors, you may not have this. This is in the editor level library, which you can only get through the plugins here. The plugin that you need is editor scripting utilities. This isn't turned on by default, but this is really important for these types of tools. So you want to enable that one. It is in beta. But it's, I think, going to be well supported. There might be some changes to it as we go into 5.0, but definitely use this plugin for these tools. So that gives us the get selected level actors, so we can get all the level actors. And once we have all the level actors, we could save this to a variable, but we don't actually need to. We're just going to immediately go on a for loop for this. And on this dynamic entry box, we're now going to do a create entry of class. And the class is going to be that new widget that we just made, which is the list item. In the last lesson, that's our widget here, which has the checkbox and the old name and the new name. Then when we pull off of this pin here, it's now the right element. Well, what we want to do is we want to set up all the data for it. So we're actually going to go back to our list item, and we're going to create a new function here, which we're going to call initialize. And in this initialize, it's going to have a bunch of properties. Like it's going to set be enabled if that's necessary. So that will become something that can be set. We'll have that in the initialize here, we can set our default. So we're going to set our default value to true. So that's what it will happen if they don't plug anything in. Owner, we need to set that up. So that needs to be passed in. That's something that, they can't just leave undone. Actor, this is going to be, if it's an actor, will happen here, but if it's an asset, then it will not. So that's something that, again, needs to be passed in. Same thing here, we're going to do set asset. Here, and then we don't need to set the old name or the new name because that's going to be something that we derive, but we do need to set the index. That's something that has to get passed in from the loop above. So now we have this function. We can run that initialize on this value. Going to again leave enabled it checked as it is. We're going to do self to get a reference to self, and we're going to do resolve soft reference and plug that into owner. Next, we have the actor here. We're going to run actor into the array element, because in this case, that is what this is a for loop of, is a for loop of actors. We're going to leave asset blank. This would instead be used in the cases where we need to have the asset data, so we're modifying assets instead. And then array index, we're going to run into index here. That populates most of the data, but it doesn't really get us what we need quite yet. So we're actually going to go back to our list item, and we're going to create another function. And this function is going to be cache old name. So when this function runs, it's going to do a few things. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to try to get the actor. It's going to use a validated get. If the actor is valid, then we know we're in an actor one. If it's not, then we're going to check out the assets. So let's do that as well. Let's do get asset, and let's do is valid. We do a branch. If it's false, we're not going to do anything, which is probably an invalid case, but we don't have a big surface area of code here, so we're going to just ignore that eventuality, and we're going to do nothing. If it's true, though, we're going to take this actor. If it is valid, if this actor does exist, we're going to get the display name, because that's what we're going to be renaming, and we're going to store that as old name right away. And then conversely, if it is an asset data and the asset is valid, instead we will run a get full name, and we're going to do get base file name, and we want to remove the path. So we have just the file name, there's no extension, nothing else there, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to set old name to that. And then again, we're going to do a return. Oh, not that type of return, a different type of return. And that closes us all off in this loop. We'll go back to that initialize, and after initialize, we're going to cache the old name. And that gets us again to this step. Before we go much farther, though, because we still have some more that we need to do in that initialize, we need to actually do the renaming, find pattern, replace pattern stuff. But before we do anything else there, let's just replicate this behavior, but for assets. So we're going to preview assets. Same thing on clicked, which will create a function. We're going to copy and paste everything here, hook it all up, but we're going to do a little bit of surgery, delete the get selected actors, disconnect this array element, and delete these pins here. Instead, plug them into asset, and we can pull that back so we get an asset data. And then we're going to do get selected asset data, which gives us a list of the asset data that are selected. You can also do get selected assets, but that's going to make sure that's going to load all the assets, which you don't really need to do for this renaming. And so again, we do get selected asset data, and otherwise it's identical. It's the same code. Let's give this a shot. Let's see what this looks like. It should be kind of working so far now that if we do run editor utility widget and we have a bunch of actors selected, we do preview actors, then now we have the names here. We don't have what the names are going to become. We don't have any of that, but we do have the current names of the selected actors. And so we've, again, got some more work to do, but we're getting closer. Let's go ahead and do that next part. So the next part is doing the find and replace that we had from the from before. So one of the goals of this behavior is that we would have some wildcards and some ability to do some indexing. And you can do all of this in blueprints directly, but it's definitely easier to do a lot of this stuff in Python. So instead, let's do here, and let's do a find and replace Python for this function. We're going to do execute Python script. This is probably the Python type of node that I recommend for this kind of work, because it has a really powerful ability to have inputs, which can become variables, and outputs, which also can become variables. So you can really work on it just inline, as if it's its own little like Unreal function. I do recommend wrapping it in a function wherever possible, because that can really help, one, just make the things you need, but it can also help keep things encapsulated so you can reuse it without having to do quite as much work. So let's actually start by writing our code in an editor that has some Python information, for example, VS Code. It's a lot easier than using this little window here, which doesn't give you any syntax highlighting and it's kind of a pain. So instead, let's just write it over here in the editor, or in this Python here. And so I'm just going to get started. I'm going to do import re, which is the regex importer, because we're going to be using regex here. You can do this a bunch of different ways, but regex gives me exactly what I want. We're going to be passing in a few variables. So from Unreal, we're going to have, that name, that old name. And so just for clarity, I'm going to get that from input parameter. This is going to come from Unreal, which is name var. And we're going to get that index, an index variable, which comes from, also comes from Unreal. And then we've got this find pattern, and we need to resolve any variables that we use into it. So here, I'm going to create a new variable called resolved find pattern. That's going to be equal to mostly the find pattern. What we're actually using here is f strings, and because we want to use the way that Python already lets you kind of embed variables, and also you do things like padding really quickly with f strings here. So we're going to wrap this in an eval. We're going to wrap whatever the find pattern is in a f string. So now whatever find pattern is will be wrapped in an f string and then evaluated, and we'll get that result. We only want to do this if that allow wildcards is true. So we'll do if allow wildcards, else it'll just be the original find pattern. And we'll do the same thing for the replace pattern. Again, find pattern itself and replace pattern are going to come from Unreal. We need to be able to set up the ignore case ability. So here we're going to create a variable called flags. We're going to set this to 0 by default because we want things to be, we're going to set this to 0 if the case sensitive flag variable is true. That's going to come from Unreal. And if it's not true, then we're going to use the re.ignore case so that the regex command is an ignore case. So, actually by default, because we're going to be set this case sensitive to false, we're going to get this re-ignore case. Next, we have the actual replace command that we're going to do. And so that looks a little bit like this. That's output equals re.sub, which gives us some control here. And we're going to say the pattern variable is equal to our resolved find pattern. Then the replace variable is equal to our resolved replace pattern. The string is going to be equal to a variable that we get from Unreal called source string. That's going to be our old string rather. We want to set up the count to be equal to our count, and we want to set up the flags to be equal to that flags variable. And so before we move on, let's get this part working. There's one really important piece, which is related to the search from the end versus search from the beginning. But it's probably important to get something working before we go too far. So I'm going to just copy this code here. I'm going to paste it into this. We need to now create all of those variables that we had before. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to create all these inputs. We're going to say name var, index var, find pattern, replace pattern, allow wildcards, case sensitive, count, from right. From right doesn't actually exist yet, but it will. So I think that's all of those. And now we get to do it the other way around. So we've got our find patterns here. We can get to create all of the variables that we actually want. So again, we're going to go here, and this is going to become well, we can kind of skip a step here for this first one. This is this old name. We can just plug that directly in because that's how this function is going to be used. We can do new name. We're going to ignore. That's going to become the output. So here we're going to do output here. New name. We want that index again. We're going to plug index in directly. This becomes the find pattern. And we'll do another replace pattern. We'll have a Boolean for allow wildcards. We're going to have another Boolean for case sensitivity. An index, an integer thing for count. A Boolean for from right. And a variable for string, call it source string, which is also actually something that we missed here. So let's just go ahead and let's see if we can insert here. And we'll do insert source string. And similarly, we're going to just move this to the top. In fact, let's just reorder this a bit as well, just to make it a little bit cleaner for us. We're going to move count to after the replace, because that matches where we were before, and we'll move count after replace pattern here. And then that feels closer to where we were. We'll actually reorder case sensitivity as well. Those all line up. These are the variables. We might move them to the bottom, just since they are unrelated to the interface and are kind of internal properties. And then this goes into here and we execute. So now we have almost everything. We've now built the piece of code here. Again, we don't have the from right yet. We'll get to that in a moment. But we have the find and replace. And so now we just need to do the rename. And so we can do this a bunch of different ways, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create another function which is actually called preview rename, since that's the behavior that we think of on the outside. And here for this preview rename, we're going to run that find and replace Python function. We're actually going to run this into an output too. In fact, we won't set this to variable. It's actually the better idea. Instead here, we're just going to have a return node. And we're going to run a string here called renamed string. And then let's run it to that back. You kind of really want to make sure that these things are given that have the right colors, so that it knows what it is, which is a string. So in this preview rename, now we can now set the new name to that afterwards, and that doesn't force this find and replace function to actually do that. This could be used for more things. But here we now need to get all the values from our owner. So all of these settings aren't here inside of this list item. They don't exist here. We don't have access to what the find pattern is or the replace pattern in these lists. Instead, what we have is we only have the owner itself. So what we're going to do here is we're going to resolve the owner. So this will be the actual owner here. We're going to do a is valid check because we don't want, if this is not valid, then we can't continue. Again, this would be an error case if this can't be found, but we're going to probably ignore that error case at least for now. But then on this owner, we're going to do all those bits. So again, we're going to promote this to a local variable version of the owner, so we don't have to do that resolve each time. Actually, order of operations, we should just do this part first. So we should do here, and then from that temp owner, we should do that. And then we can run from there. So the source string in this case is the old name. The find pattern will be our temp owner find pattern, get find pattern. Replace pattern. We'll go into the replace pattern here. Same thing for case sensitivity. And get replaced from right for that last one. So that gives us that function. So now all we have to do is back in the initialize, we're just going to go ahead and also preview a rename. So we cache the old name, and then we preview the rename. So now here in this, if we run this editor utility widget and we put something in here, like we want to replace SM with BAM, we preview actors, there we go. Even the special characters in there, there's no sort of validation for any of that. It's totally working, but we aren't actually renaming anything yet. This is just the preview. We haven't gone to the confirm rename yet. And we also don't have from right. So before we go to do the confirm, let's just fix the from right here. To test this out, we're going to just do SM here. We'll just try to test this one here. And if we do, again, we got replace count 1, so we do preview actors. You can see I've replaced just the first one with BAM. If I set this replace count to 0, then all of them are replaced to BAM. But if I do replace from right and I set it to 1, it's still just from the left because we haven't hooked up this behavior yet. So let's go do that now. So back in our Python script, we have it reporting, but we want to do it from the back and the other way around. And, there's probably a lot of ways to do this. And I don't know what the absolute best one is, but this is the version that I came up with. It's kind of gross, but it totally works. So we're using it. We do from right, which is that variable that we have. So if it's from right, we want to do one thing, and if it's not, we want to do the other. And if it's from right, we want to do the same thing. We're doing the identical work here, except that we're going to reverse everything. So we're going to use the Python shorthand to reverse a array, which a string is also an array, or a list rather. So you can easily just reverse all of those, and then we're going to reverse the result. So we reverse the find pattern, the replace pattern, and the string pattern, and then we're going to reverse the result. And what that does is that functionally does the behavior that we're looking for, which is it reverses it from the other way around. So again here, we're going to run that utility widget. We've selected this one here. We're going to type in sm. We're going to make it go foo, and we're going to preview actors, and you can see it's replaced foo sm. If we do replace from right, it's now sm and foo. There we go. So this sets up our renaming scheme, but we still have to actually make it do the renaming, and that's what we're going to tackle in the next video coming up.